Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Li Qinghao had actually never been to the area where Bai Xiaochun's residence was located. After all, it was in a somewhat remote part of the mountain. As he proceeded along, the courtyard residence soon became visible off in the distance. However, before he could get very close, a fair, clear-faced figure appeared, holding a piece of roasted meat in his hand, walking and eating at the same time. He seemed to be engrossed in his eating, and was even humming a little tune. Li Qinghao's face darkened as he realized that the meat currently being stuffed into Bai Xiaochun's mouth was definitely a chicken leg. Anger instantly flared up in his heart. "Bai Xiaochun," he roared, his voice booming out like thunder. Bai Xiaochun, who was in the middle of sucking on the chicken bone, very nearly jumped up into the air in fright. "Peak Lord Li," he gasped, his eyes widening. Without even thinking about it, he stuffed the entire chicken bone into his mouth, then vigorously crunched it to pieces and swallowed it down, his face turning a deep purple in the process. In the entire sect, the person he feared the most was Li Qinghao, which was especially true after having eaten so many of his chickens. Bai Xiaochun actually felt a little bit guilty. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he hurried over, looking extremely charming and also very sincere as he clasped hands and bowed in greeting. "Disciple offers greetings, Peak Lord." Li Qinghao looked at Bai Xiaochun, his face completely expressionless. Inwardly, he felt a bit torn. Bai Xiaochun's ancestor had truly shown him a great kindness, and Li Qinghao was the type of person who valued such things deeply. Despite what Bai Xiaochun had obviously done, he couldn't forget about what had happened all those years ago. The Peak Lords from Green Crest Peak and Violet Cauldron Peak had come to speak with him about the matter of the spirit tail chickens. Although the chickens weren't necessarily very expensive, Li Qinghao couldn't allow other people to criticize his own disciple, so he compensated them with several times more than the chicken's actual value. Now, he looked at Bai Xiaochun, feeling even more irritated than ever at how he wasn't living up to expectations. Li Qinghao snorted and then said, "You've been an outer sect disciple for a little more than half a year, but your cultivation base has only progressed from the 3rd level of qi condensation to the 4th. Pleased with yourself?" Bai Xiaochun blinked, then cleared his throat, unsure of how to respond. However, he continued to put on the charming face, reassuring himself that as long as he maintained the right attitude, things should work out fine in the end. However, when he thought about the fact that he had just been munching on a spirit tail chicken leg, he couldn't help but sweat. Li Qinghao felt a headache coming on. After a moment of thought, he coolly continued, "Considering how you've been fooling around, you obviously have a lot of time on your hands. In that case, why don't you join the competition for 4th and 5th level qi condensation disciples in 3 months? It will be right here on Fragrant Cloud Peak." Bai Xiaochun's heart immediately began to pound. He had heard about the competition Li Qinghao was referring to. He knew that there were prizes to be won, but he had also heard that the fighting was fierce. If you weren't careful, it was even possible to get injured. Bai Xiaochun scowled. "Peak Lord, I'm only at the 4th level of qi condensation. If I join in the competition, what happens if one of them ends up beating me to death? What would I do then?" Li Qinghao completely ignored his question. Looking very serious, he said, "It's not a request. You will join the contest. Plus, if you don't place in the top 5, then I'll..." Bai Xiaochun sighed. "I know, you'll expel me from the sect, right?" Li Qinghao glared at him. Knowing how mischievous Bai Xiaochun was, he realized that the threat of being expelled from the sect probably wasn't enough to keep him in place. Remembering how much Bai Xiaochun feared death, he suddenly swished his sleeve, sweeping Bai Xiaochun up from the courtyard and then flying toward the top of the mountain. Bai Xiaochun's heart began to thump madly. Li Qinghao's expressionless face gave him a very bad feeling. The wind buffeted his face as they flew along, and before he had time to even analyze the matter, Li Qinghao had taken him to a location behind Fragrant Cloud Peak. It was a place considered to be a restricted area, a place few disciples ever visited. The first thing he noticed was the thick vegetation everywhere. As they flew down toward the area, Li Qinghao pulled Bai Xiaochun along until they were in a valley. Almost immediately, a sinister aura could be sensed, and the various plants in the area brightened in color and even began to rustle. Bai Xiaochun's heart raced as he looked at the plants, and a sensation of deadly crisis rose up in his heart. He was just about to speak when, all of a sudden, a crimson viper raised its head, flicking its forked tongue as it stared icily at Bai Xiaochun. Snake. Bai Xiaochun had no choice but to follow Li Qinghao into the valley, and when he did, his scalp went numb as he realized that the ground, the plants, and even the trees in this place were filled with countless snakes. All of them were brightly colored, making it obvious that they were vipers. Furthermore, all of them were staring at him with cold, beady eyes, forked tongues flicking in and out of their mouths. Bai Xiaochun started trembling. He had always been scared of snakes, and the way these ones were looking at him left him terrified. Although they didn't actually seem like they were going to attack him, their long fangs dripped with venom in a very frightening fashion. It was at this point that Bai Xiaochun suddenly remembered that he had his undying skin, and that these vipers probably wouldn't be able to bite through it. Considering that, even if there were more snakes than there already were, to him they were about as dangerous as feeble chickens. In the end, they weren't really very scary at all. However, his eyes then turned up in thought, and he realized how risky it would be to not look scared. If that happened, Li Qinghao might take him to an even more dangerous place. Therefore, he immediately let out a shriek, and tried to look as frightened as possible. Li Qinghao let out a cold snort, then unleashed his cultivation base. The wriggling snakes slowly moved out of the way to make a small path, at the end of which was a pitch-black cave that emanated a noxious odor. "Uncle Li, spare me, please," Bai Xiaochun called out in a quavering voice. "I didn't break any sect rules." Li Qinghao's face was completely expressionless as he grabbed Bai Xiaochun and dragged him over to the cave. Once they reached the cave mouth, he waved his sleeve, causing the darkness to fill with a bit of light. Bai Xiaochun could instantly see that the cave was filled with numerous vipers, some of them very large. The hissing sounds they made seemed to contain some strange, mesmerizing power that instantly caused Bai Xiaochun's eyes to go wide. A sensation of crisis rose up, and he began to pant as he realized that the cultivation base power of these vipers was unexpectedly high. There was even one four-colored viper that was comparable to the 5th level of qi condensation. The stares of the snakes made Bai Xiaochun feel as if a cold wind were blowing down his back. Then he thought about his undying skin and realized that he wouldn't last for very long against these snakes. This time, he didn't need to pretend, he really was scared. "This is 10,000 Snakes Valley," Li Qinghao said, voice cool, "where we harvest venom here on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Each one of these snakes is extremely venomous. In fact, a single drop of their venom is potent enough to kill 100 oxen. Any cultivator under Foundation establishment bitten by one of these snakes, who doesn't get the antidote in time, will die. Deep in the cave is the Snake King, who is in the great circle of qi condensation. Get bitten by that snake, and even I would have a hard time saving you. If you don't get in the top 5 in the outer sect's competition, don't worry. I won't expel you from the sect. I'll just bring you here and have you harvest venom." Li Qinghao looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Uncle Li, don't worry, it's just a little sect competition, right? Only the top 5, you said, right? I'll definitely pull it off." Bai Xiaochun's tongue felt as if it were sticking to the roof of his mouth, and his face was deathly pale. When he heard that there were even more fearsome vipers in the depths of the cave, he swore to himself that he would never come back to this place again in his entire life. When Li Qinghao heard Bai Xiaochun's declaration, he smiled inwardly. However, his face remained completely expressionless, and he even snorted as he took Bai Xiaochun away. When they got back to Fragrant Cloud Peak, he tossed Bai Xiaochun onto a mountain path and then turned as if to leave. But then he stopped and looked back. Voice casual, he said, "Oh right, how were the spirit tail chickens?" Without even waiting for Bai Xiaochun to respond, he turned and flew off into the distance. Bai Xiaochun sighed, then turned and headed back toward his courtyard, frowning the entire way. As he walked along, the wind blew, rustling the leaves, which made him think about the vipers. Back in his courtyard, he sat there, gnashing his teeth and scowling. Li Qinghao, more like Li the Snake. Ridiculous. I'll definitely never go back to that 10,000 Snakes Valley. If I get bitten, I'll lose my poor little life. In that moment, Bai Xiaochun made his decision. I'm definitely going to go all out to get into the top 5. If I'm going to join that competition, then considering the level of my cultivation base, I'm definitely going to need some spirit medicine. Taking a deep breath, Bai Xiaochun clenched his fists. A wild gleam appeared in his eyes as he glanced around. Eventually, his gaze fell upon the Spirit Winter Bamboo. After I finish the Spirit Winter Bamboo mission and get my reward, I'll have enough merit points to get some spirit medicine. Unfortunately, the bamboo hasn't even reached 15 meters. I'm not sure if that meets the requirements. Having reached this point in his train of thoughts, Bai Xiaochun still wasn't certain about the bamboo. However, he didn't have any other options. After doing a few calculations, he confirmed that the appointed deadline to hand in the spirit vegetation was rapidly approaching. Bai Xiaochun scowled his way through a few more days. At dawn on the fourth day, he got up early and walked over to the bamboo. Then he wrapped his arms around one stalk after another to pull them up out of the ground. What he found was that although the bamboo did not seem to be very heavy, each and every stalk actually felt as if it were made from metal, and was incredibly heavy. The ground trembled constantly until 10 stalks of bamboo were uprooted. Each one was close to 15 meters tall, and as thick as a person. Throwing them over his shoulder, he marched out of the courtyard in the direction of the missions office. Unfortunately, his bag of holding wasn't very big inside, and the bamboo just wouldn't fit in it. That was why he had to physically carry the bamboo. Thankfully, he was much stronger now, having achieved the undying iron skin. Otherwise, he would never have been able to pull the task off. As he walked along, he muttered to himself miserably. But then he thought about the competition, and the vipers, and possibility of his bones and tendons being snapped in the fighting. Why am I so unlucky? The bamboo was extremely heavy, and he was carrying 10 stalks. Couple that with the fact that he was climbing a mountain, and soon Bai Xiaochun was huffing and puffing. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that he was in a really unfair situation. I began to practice immortal cultivation because I want to live forever. Why the heck would I go around fighting and killing, huh? This bamboo could obviously grow a bit taller, but right now I need those merit points. The more he thought about the situation, the more annoyed he got at the unfairness of it all. Sighing, he hefted his spirit winter bamboo as he hiked up the mountain path. Currently, quite a large group of outer sect disciples was gathered outside of Fragrant Cloud Peak's missions office, hands filled with various medicinal plants which they would exchange for merit points. A Fragrant Cloud Peak elder was present to inspect the items being handed in. The amount of merit points given as a reward depended on the quality of the items handed in. Just outside of the building itself was a wide, flat boulder, upon which a ruddy-faced, white-haired old man sat cross-legged. A seemingly endless line of disciples stretched out in front of him, and everyone in line had spirit plants clutched in hand. When the old man gave his appraisal, a young assistant off to the side would record the information and dole out the merit points. Not bad. This water mist orchid already has 4 petals. Mid-grade item. This woodvane ginseng is a bit too dark, and the earth-type power is too strong. It's completely out of balance. Sorry, it doesn't meet the requirements. Circling about overhead was a flock of elegant 5-colored phoenixes, each one more than 3 meters long. Occasionally, they would make melodious calls that rang out in the area. They were spirit pets belonging to the elder who sat there, and whenever the appointed day came to hand in plants and vegetation, the birds would come along with him. They were, of course, the subject of much envy on the part of the outer sect disciples. The elder's cultivation base was in the foundation establishment stage, and was clearly beyond ordinary. Although his overall skill with spirit medicines didn't match up to Li Qinghao's, he was still very famous in the sect. Furthermore, his obsession with the Tao of medicines had reached a frightening level that even Li Qinghao couldn't equal. Many people even said that if a third master apothecary ever appeared in the Eastwood continent, then it would definitely be this very Elder Zhou. There was one particular young man in the line who wasn't very handsome, but stood tall and straight. When he reached Elder Zhou, he clasped hands and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Elder Zhou, it's me, Chen Ziying." When the other outer sect disciples in the area heard the young man's name, they all looked over curiously. "Oh, so he's elder brother Chen Ziying. I heard that he's quite gifted when it comes to growing spirit plants." "I heard that too. Ever since Chen Ziying joined the sect, he's never grown a spirit plant that got less than a high-grade rating. He's really incredible." As the discussions continued in low tones, Chen Ziying stood there with a tranquil, indifferent expression on his face. However, deep in his eyes burned a proud and lofty air. Elder Zhou could see how pleased Chen Ziying was. He had long since been keeping an eye on him, considering how gifted he was when it came to growing spirit plants. "Ziying, what type of plant did you grow this time?" Elder Zhou asked warmly. "Elder Zhou, I'm happy to report that I grew spirit winter bamboo." With that, Chen Ziying waved his hand, causing 10 stalks of spirit winter bamboo to appear. Each one was as thick as an arm, and over 2 meters long. They were emerald green, and even flickered with a faint green glow. I first soaked the seeds in a spirit spring, then ground some spirit stones into gravel to act as soil. Next, I fed the plants with my own spiritual energy at least every 6 hours. Every 3 days, I would carefully tend to their leaves, and I even used the 9 greens profound magic I mastered, as well as other medicinal plants, to grow them to this level. Very good, said Elder Joe, stroking his beard. The praise in his eyes was clear. These stalks of bamboo are over 2 meters long, and pulse with green energy. They exceed the high-grade mark, and can be classified as extreme high-grade. I encourage you to keep working hard. If you can grow the bamboo to over 3 meters, then they will be classified as superior grade. When the surrounding outer sect disciple heard the words extreme high grade, even more discussions broke out, and numerous envious gazes were cast in the direction of the spirit winter bamboo. A smile broke out on Chen Ziyang's face, and the lofty gleam in his eyes intensified. He clasped hands and bowed, and was just about to walk over to the assistant to collect his merit points, when a cold snort suddenly rang out. Elder Joe, disciple Zhao Yiduo also grew some spirit winter bamboo. A long-faced young man with narrow eyes suddenly appeared. As he approached, he cast a glance of disdain in Chen Ziyang's direction. 1. Zhao Yidia's name in Chinese is Zhao Yiduo. Zhao Yiduo. Zhao is a common surname. Yi means one, and Duo means more. His sudden appearance on the scene instantly caused excitement among the surrounding outer sect disciples, who all looked over at him. It's elder brother Zhao Yiduo. Elder brother Zhao's skill with spirit plants and vegetation is supposedly neck and neck with Chen Ziyang's. Well, now we get to see them face off. They've been rivals for some time now, and both of them want to be known as the #1 botanist among all the disciples. Chen Ziyang's expression immediately darkened. He looked coldly at Zhao Yiduo, who glared back at him. The hostility in their eyes instantly intensified. Zhao Yiduo, go ahead and take out your spirit winter bamboo, Elder Joe said encouragingly. Apparently, even he was interested in finding out what was going to happen. He was well aware of the competition between the two young disciples, and was in fact happy to see it. It was only by means of healthy competition that great advancement could be made. Zhao Yiduo clasped hands and bowed to Elder Joe, then slapped his bag of holding to produce 10 stalks of spirit winter bamboo, each and every one of which was over 3 meters long and thicker than a person's leg. They were bright emerald green and even seemed somewhat crystalline. From the spiritual energy they emanated, it was clear that they were beyond normal, and also far above Chen Ziyang's in terms of quality. The mere sight of the bamboo sent the crowd into an uproar. Most people had heard that spirit winter bamboo could grow longer than 3 meters, but had never seen it before. Spirit winter bamboo 3 meters long. I wonder how long it took to grow. That spirit winter bamboo has reached the point where it's emanating spiritual energy. Elder brother Zhao's ability with plants definitely puts him as the #1 outer sect disciple on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Seeing how excited the crowd was, Zhao Yiduo smiled provokingly at Chen Ziyang. Chen Ziyang's face immediately darkened. As for Elder Joe, his eyes gleamed with praise as he looked at the bamboo and then nodded. Excellent, excellent. Quite a few disciples have handed in spirit winter bamboo today, but yours is definitely the best in terms of quality. It isn't high grade, it's definitely superior grade. Very, very good job, Zhao Yiduo. Keep up the good work. Zhao Yiduo once again bowed to Elder Joe, then looked over challengingly at Chen Ziyang. Junior brother Chen, it seems you need to put some more work into your studies. Chen Ziyang's expression grew even darker, and he snorted coldly. Isn't it a bit early to gloat, elder brother Zhao? After all, it doesn't count when you have someone helping you. Next time, I'll definitely grow the spirit winter bamboo to 5 meters tall. Hearing this, Zhao Yiduo laughed heartily. Junior brother Chen, if you talk yourself up too much, you're bound to crash and burn. Spirit winter bamboo is extremely hard to grow because of the incredible amount of spiritual energy it requires. For chi condensation disciples like us, growing it to 3 meters is the absolute limit of the limit. And you think you're going to grow it to 5 meters? Only foundation establishment elders could do something like that. That's not even to mention 6 meters. In all the years I've been in the sect, I've never even seen 6-meter tall spirit win. Before Zhao Yiduo could even finish speaking, booming thuds could be heard from the path leading up to the mission's office, as if some enormous creature were approaching. Instantly, the outer sect disciples turned in shock, whereupon gasps began to ring out. The standoff between Zhao Yiduo and Chen Ziying was also interrupted, and both of them frowned and looked over toward the path. Soon, what became visible were the tops of several stalks of enormous bamboo, thicker than a person. They were a bright emerald green, and if you looked closely, you would even see some violet specks flickering on their surface. They also emanated a splendid, multicolored glow. Even more shocking was the powerful spiritual energy emanating off of the bamboo, which instantly led to cries of shock. What is that stuff? It looks like some kind of tree, but at the same time, it also looks like bamboo. Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo were frowning, and couldn't even identify what it was they were looking at. However, they could tell that it was something incredible. Off to the side, Elder Zhou's eyes were wide as he stared at the bamboo, and he even began to pant slightly. Everyone stared as more and more of the bamboo became visible. When the bamboo was completely revealed, shockingly, each stalk was 15 meters tall, and it was being carried by a petite young man, who was currently panting as he trudged up the path, the bamboo slung over his shoulder. He almost looked like an ant carrying a steamed manto. Every step that he took resulted in a booming thud, and as he walked along, the outer sect disciples made way for him, shocked by how strong he appeared to be. The young man was, of course, Bai Xiaochun, who had been grumbling to himself the entire way about the brutality of the competition and the horror of 10,000 Snakes Valley. Although he wanted to cry, no tears would come, and as he trudged along, he didn't even notice the crowd of people looking at him. When he reached Elder Zhou, he tossed the bamboo down onto the ground, which resulted in a huge boom. Then he sat down on top of the bamboo, huffing and puffing a bit as he wiped the sweat from his brow. I couldn't fit this bamboo in my bag of holding. Man, I'm totally worn out. Oh, hello Elder, I'm here to hand in this mission. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun got an odd feeling, and looked around to find everyone in the crowd staring at his bamboo. Gasps could even be heard. Bamboo. That stuff is actually bamboo? It's so big, I've never seen bamboo that big before. Come on, they must be trees, right? Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo couldn't conceal their astonishment as they realized what they were looking at. However, they almost couldn't make themselves believe it was true, and knelt down to inspect the bamboo more closely. Zhao Yiduo began to tremble, and had to resist the urge to try and break open one of the bamboo stalks to examine it from the inside. Before he could, Elder Zhou tromped over and then waved his sleeve, sending Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo tumbling off to the side. Then Elder Zhou stood there, staring at the bamboo with wide eyes. After a long moment, he took a deep breath and said, This really is spirit winter bamboo. The surrounding outer sect disciples gaped in shock for a moment, and then burst into an uproar. Spirit winter bamboo. I can't believe those big trees are actually spirit winter bamboo. How is that even possible? How could spirit winter bamboo get so thick? Heavens, they're actually 15 meters long. 15 meters and as thick as a person. That's bamboo? The sounds of the uproar grew even louder as people began to compare Bai Xiaochun's bamboo with that of Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo. Bai Xiaochun gaped in shock at the commotion. Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo, apparently completely oblivious to the pain caused by Elder Zhou tossing them aside, rushed back toward the bamboo and knelt down to examine it. Elder Zhou began to study the stalks of bamboo one by one, his expression that of shock and elation. Everyone's crazed reaction left Bai Xiaochun somewhat alarmed. In his mind, these people were acting like lunatics. It was just bamboo, after all, right? Besides, he had originally planned to grow it to a total of 30 meters before turning it in. Bai Xiaochun took a few steps back and then tried to get the elder's attention. Elder, he cried loudly. Wonderful. Amazing. Elder Zhou said, laughing as he began to caress each and every inch of the bamboo. Apparently, he hadn't even heard Bai Xiaochun speaking. Spirit winter bamboo like this is extremely rare. Only by growing it to 15 meters can it achieve such a deep green color. In fact, at this point, it's not a medicinal plant, but rather, the primary ingredient to forge spirit bamboo swords. It can even be used to cast certain unique magical techniques. Listen up everyone. Take a deep breath. Looking very excited, Elder Zhou closed his eyes and breathed in deeply through his nose. Can you smell that fragrance? It smells like flesh and bone, right? That's the unique aroma that appears after this type of bamboo reaches 15 meters. Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo earnestly followed suit. The other disciples in the area also pressed forward to do the same. Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat. He had noticed that same aroma as he was carrying the bamboo down the path. However, he was pretty sure that it was actually the aroma of chicken bones. After all, he had buried several hundred spirit-tailed chicken skeletons in the spirit field where he had grown the spirit winter bamboo. Furthermore, those bones had all been stripped clean of their meat by none other than him. By now, Bai Xiaochun was thoroughly convinced that these people were crazy. "Elder," he cried out again. However, it was at this point that a violent tremor ran through Elder Zhou, flames of rage sprang up in his eyes, and his expression twisted with rage. "Damn it, what the hell happened here? Someone actually bit a chunk out? Spirit winter bamboo is extremely bitter and can't be eaten raw. What bastard actually bit a chunk out and ruined the quality?" Elder Zhou seemed to be filled with grief. To him, it was like discovering a perfect piece of beautiful jade, only to find one part that had been destroyed by pests. His head suddenly whipped up to look at Bai Xiaochun. "It wasn't me," Bai Xiaochun blurted, backing up nervously. He suddenly thought back to the first time he had been struck by incredible hunger. In his desperation at not having anything to eat, he had taken a bite out of one of the stalks of bamboo. How could he ever have imagined this would be the terrifying scene that would result when he went to hand in the mission, or how that single bite would affect these lunatics? When the surrounding disciples heard what Elder Zhou said, they peered over toward the last of the spirit winter bamboo stalks, and sure enough, there was a big bite mark clearly visible. Elder Zhou stared at the damaged portion of the bamboo, then let out a long sigh. After all, he was a foundation establishment cultivator, and was obsessed with the Tao of medicines. However, this bamboo that Bai Xiaochun had brought was so shocking, and so different from anything Elder Zhou had ever seen before, that he had lost his composure just now. Finally, he took a deep look at Bai Xiaochun, then flicked his sleeve. "This bamboo is extreme super grade. No, wait, supreme grade. Yes, listed as supreme grade. The reward is 10,000 merit points." The audience gasped in response. The usual reward for plant-growing missions was usually about 10 merit points. At the most, one might be able to get 100. But in this case, the reward was 10,000. Off to the side, the assistant gaped in shock. For years and years, it had always been a rarity to have a spirit plant listed as supreme grade. In fact, this was the first one in hundreds of years. Bai Xiaochun was very excited, and immediately walked over to the assistant and handed over his identity medallion. The assistant hesitated for a moment, then looked over at Elder Zhou, who was still studying the bamboo, then gritted his teeth and gave the merit points to Bai Xiaochun. Having acquired his merit points, Bai Xiaochun quickly turned to leave, determined to never come back and deal with these lunatics ever again. However, before he could leave, Elder Zhou suddenly called out, "Hey, what's your name?" "Bai Xiaochun," was the immediate response. "I'm Bai Xiaochun, and my uncle is Li Qinghao." Before coming here, he had been completely unaware that the bamboo would cause such a scene, and he was actually a bit worried about that, which was why he pulled out Li Qinghao's name, as sort of a threat. HMPH. Elder Zhou seemed to be irritated that Bai Xiaochun would resort to dropping Li Qinghao's name. You might think you're pretty clever, but the Spirit Stream sect is one of the great sects, with a long history. There are always disciples who come along with their secrets and their unique good fortune. I won't lower myself to the level of asking for the specifics of how you grew this bamboo, but next time you grow something similar, you make sure to bring it all to me. I'll make sure you get a nice reward of merit points. Finally, he waved his hand to dismiss Bai Xiaochun, then went back to studying the bamboo. It was at this point that, because of the matter with the bamboo, the entire mission handover event concluded. Bai Xiaochun clutched his identity medallion firmly in hand as he hurried away from the mission's office and then headed directly toward Fragrant Cloud Peak's Spirit Medicine Pharmacy, which was where disciples could acquire spirit medicines. It was also where disciples could hand over spirit medicines that they had crafted, and thus earn merit points. Bai Xiaochun sped over at top speed, then hurried around the spirit medicine pharmacy trying to choose what to buy. Eventually he decided to purchase a bottle of medicinal pills suitable for the 5th level of qi condensation. These medicinal pills were by no means cheap. Bai Xiaochun had originally assumed that 10,000 merit points was a lot, but unexpectedly, the spirit medicines were actually very expensive. Green God Spirit Gathering Pills, he murmured, looking at the medicinal pill bottle he held in his hand. Inside were 3 medicinal pills, which had cost him fully 4,000 merit points. However, these were pills that ordinary Qi condensation disciples would usually not have access to. They were quite extraordinary. Not only was their medicinal strength greater than that of ordinary spirit medicine, they could provide purer spiritual energy. Bai Xiaochun wasn't convinced that merely stepping into the 5th level of Qi condensation would be enough, so he planned to break through all the way to the great circle of the 5th level. He had thought about aiming for the 6th level of Qi condensation to avoid having to fight in the competition, but if he did that, he could well imagine how Li Qinghao would come up with some other method of punishing him. As for the rest of his merit points, he didn't let them go to waste. He traded them for some disposable defensive talismans. With those hidden in his robe, he felt much safer. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough merit points to go through with his plan of heading to the treasure pavilion to acquire a weapon or two suitable for the Qi condensation stage. Instead, he headed back toward his residence. Once back in the courtyard, he sat down cross-legged in his log cabin, then pulled the medicinal pills out and studied them closely. I still have 3 months to go. It's time for some secluded meditation. Gritting his teeth, he looked around to make sure no one was watching, then performed an incantation gesture and pointed out. Instantly, the turtle walk flew out, along with a bunch of spirit tails, which he used to start a 3-colored flame. One tail feather wasn't enough to satisfy the turtle walk. He had to feed in 10 before the 3 designs on the walk lit up brightly. Then, he took a deep breath and put the 3 medicinal pills inside to perform a 3-fold spirit enhancement. After the process was completed, the Green God Spirit Gathering pills in his hand had 3 silver designs covering their surfaces. Finally, he placed one of them in his mouth. The medicinal pill dissolved, and spiritual energy began to course through him explosively. Bai Xiaochun instantly began to utilize the breathing techniques and postures of the Violet Qi Cauldron control art, using them to manage the flow of the spiritual energy. A few days later, rumbling sounds filled Bai Xiaochun's log cabin, and numerous dust particles blasted out in a shockwave. Moments later, Bai Xiaochun's laughter could be heard ringing out. 5th level of Qi condensation, he said, panting, eyes shining brightly. After eating so many spirit tail chickens recently, his cultivation base had already reached the great circle of the 4th level of Qi condensation. By eating that one medicinal pill, he was able to easily break through into the 5th level. More filth was expelled out from inside of him, but not as much as before. After washing up, he didn't immediately take out another medicinal pill, but rather, took time to stabilize his cultivation base. After 5 days passed, he took out the second of his 3-fold spirit-enhanced Green God Spirit Gathering pills, and consumed it. As the spiritual energy coursed through him, the river that was his spirit meridian grew larger, and flowed faster, causing his cultivation base to climb higher at a rapid rate. After stabilizing himself for a few more days, he consumed the 3rd Green God Spirit Gathering pill, and his cultivation base shot up to the great circle of the 5th level of Qi condensation. By this point, everything about him seemed different than before. His skin was fairer, and there was something unique about his energy. Bai Xiaochun was quite happy, but also realized that, normally speaking, it would be impossible to use only 3 medicinal pills to break through from the great circle of the 4th level of Qi condensation all the way to the great circle of the 5th level, and then be only a hair away from reaching the 6th level. As far as he could tell, the only reason he was able to do so was the turtle walk and its spirit enhancement ability. The more Bai Xiaochun practiced cultivation, the more obvious it was to him how helpful the turtle walk was. That in turn caused him to become even more curious about its origins. Although it looked like a turtle shell, the more he studied it, the more it seemed that it wasn't. In recent days, he had looked more into the matter of spirit enhancement, and had learned that Violet Cauldron Peak was known for their spirit enhancement abilities. In fact, if you paid enough merit points, you could even acquire the services of the elders there to perform spirit enhancements. Word had it that the Peak Lord of Violet Cauldron Peak was a Grand Master when it came to spirit enhancements. Running his fingers along the designs that covered the turtle walk, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered. Finally, he shook his head. There were too many things he didn't understand, and it wouldn't do any good to waste time thinking about them. Reaching his hand out, he caused the green jade pendant and his wooden sword to appear. These were the only magical devices he owned at the moment. Gritting his teeth, he produced some more spirit tails as he prepared to perform threefold spirit enhancements on them. I wonder what the wooden sword and jade pendant will look like after I do the threefold spirit enhancement. The wave of a hand caused the 3 designs on the turtle walk to light up. When he sent the jade pendant flying inside, silver light shone, and rumbling sounds like that of thunder could be heard. Thankfully, they didn't echo out very far, so nobody heard them. When the silver light faded away, the green jade pendant had 3 silver designs on it, which flickered brightly for a moment before fading away. However, Bai Xiaochun could sense that the jade pendant's aura was now as different from before as the heavens were from the earth. In fact, it was even possible to see glowing violet specks within the green of the jade pendant. Even the shape of the pendant had changed. Instead of being oval, it had now been flattened into a circular shape. Bai Xiaochun poured some spiritual energy into it, causing rumbling sounds to echo out as a green shield sprang up around him, fully a meter thick and completely astonishing to behold. After performing a quick test on the defensive power of the jade pendant, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but laugh out loud. Next, he turned his attention to the wooden sword. He had acquired this wooden sword the moment he had joined the sect, and since then, had performed spirit enhancements on it twice. With the protective power of this jade pendant, after I perform a threefold spirit enhancement on my little wooden sword, I'll definitely be completely extraordinary. Bai Xiaochun smiled, then began to prepare the little wooden sword for the spirit enhancement. Silver light flickered within the turtle walk. As it faded away, the little wooden sword appeared in front of Bai Xiaochun. 3 silver designs gleamed on its surface, then gradually faded away. At the same time, the physical appearance of the sword changed. It was longer by a finger's length, and the grain of the wood was now virtually completely violet. There was also a bizarre aroma which pulsed out of the sword, an aroma which, upon entering the nose, seemed sweet, but quickly caused the mind to enter a state of confused distraction. Bai Xiaochun trembled for a moment, but then his eyes grew clear. He looked in shock at the wooden sword for a moment, then reached out to grab it, whereupon he found that it was many times heavier than before. Unexpectedly, as he held it in his hand, it felt as heavy as a boulder. Eyes glittering, he examined the sword, and gradually a profound gleam rose up in his eyes. "This wooden sword is made from the rarely seen heavy cloud wood," he murmured, "which only needs to be refined for 49 days before you can use it in equipment forging. It can also be used in mass production." Next, he focused on the veins in the wood of the sword. Violet veins. There's only one explanation for that. After performing these handful of spirit enhancements, these are the signs of the sword's transmogrification. Bai Xiaochun closed his eyes and began to review the information about heavy cloud wood that he had gleaned when studying about plants and vegetation. After a while, his eyes opened, and they gleamed with anticipation. He performed an incantation gesture and then tapped the little wooden sword, which instantly caused a black light to flicker out, within which were tiny violet specks. Suddenly, the sword shot out of the log cabin, across the courtyard, and then another 30 meters or so, where it stabbed into a huge boulder. Without making a single sound, the sword then spun around inside of the rock, pierced out of it, and flew back to Bai Xiaochun. The sword wasn't damaged at all, and in fact began to emanate a piercing aura. Bai Xiaochun's expression brightened. He played around with the sword a little bit more, then once again painted over the designs. Finally, he opened the door of his log cabin, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Unfortunately, as soon as he thought about the competition in 2 months, his previously high spirits sank a bit. This isn't good enough. I'm still not well enough prepared. The other people in the competition are definitely going to be vicious beasts. I need to do more. Grinding his teeth, he thought about the 2 levels of the Violet Chi Cauldron control art, which he had read about in the manual. Lightness and heaviness. Heaviness and lightness. Those 2 levels of the Violet Chi Cauldron control art were powerful magics that appeared when cultivating the art. If both were cultivated to the pinnacle, they could lead to a divine ability called Violet Chi Cauldron Summoning. On the south bank of the Spirit Stream sect, the fundamental techniques of the Violet Chi Cauldron control art were something that virtually everyone practiced. However, few people cultivated lightness and heaviness, and as for the second stage of heaviness and lightness, that was even more rare. As for those who cultivated the art to the absolute peak, and could unleash the Violet Chi Cauldron summoning divine ability, they were most rare of all. Actually, the majority of those who gained enlightenment of Violet Chi Cauldron summoning were disciples from Violet Cauldron Peak. lightness and heaviness. Only by reaching that stage of being able to completely control physical objects can I even be absolutely assured of rising above the pack. Bai Xiaochun continued to think about the description of the technique as he gazed down at the little wooden sword. Back when he had fought his battle with Shu Baosai, everyone from the supervisor's department and even the ovens had mistakenly assumed that he had gained enlightenment of lightness and heaviness. Now that he thought back to the situation, an idea flickered through his mind. The reason people thought I had achieved lightness and heaviness was because of how adeptly I controlled my little wooden sword. However, the real reason behind that was mostly because of how incredible the sword became after my spirit enhancement. The truth of the matter is that my ability to control it isn't actually that incredible, and definitely is not lightness and heaviness. Frowning, Bai Xiaochun randomly sat down cross-legged and looked at the wooden sword. Gradually, his eyes grew blank, and were soon shot with blood. A moment later, his right hand suddenly waved up into the air, sending the little wooden sword flying out. It whistled through the air in front of him, kicking up a cloud of dust. Bai Xiaochun's frown deepened as his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then pointed his finger out. However, what he pointed at wasn't the sword, but rather, the huge rock outside the courtyard that he had just stabbed with the sword moments ago. The wave of his finger caused the huge stone to tremble slightly, then gradually rise up into the air by about 1/3 of a meter. But then Bai Xiaochun's spiritual energy grew unstable, and it thumped back down with a boom. Bai Xiaochun was not dismayed, though. In fact, quite the opposite. His eyes began to shine brightly. Focusing completely, he circulated his spiritual energy and once again waved his finger. Once, twice, 3 times. Time passed. Half a month was gone in the blink of an eye. Virtually that entire time, Bai Xiaochun worked on trying to control the boulder. Of course, this boulder was about as tall as 3 people put together, and weighed about 1,500 to 1,600 kilograms. Despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun was already in the great circle of the 5th level of qi condensation, manipulating an object like this was not an easy task. 1. The only reason Bai Xiaochun could do so was because of the extraordinarily refined state of his cultivation base. Anyone else in the 5th level of qi condensation would never be able to move the boulder more than a handful of centimeters. Bai Xiaochun worked hard for an entire month. By this point, he realized that the reason controlling the boulder was so difficult wasn't because of a lack of spiritual energy, but rather, that his level of control was lacking. Even when he still had plenty of spiritual energy, the connection would always break. The key is to move the threads of spiritual energy at a constant speed, he muttered hoarsely, eyes bloodshot but shining brightly. That's how to make sure they never break. It was the same principle that applied to mortals when they were making noodles at home. If you pulled the dough apart too quickly, it would snap. If you went too slowly, it would be impossible to stretch them out very far. You had to use just the right amount of strength, and then you can control the objects smoothly and clearly however you wish. If cultivators wanted to control physical objects to a degree that surpassed the ordinary, they would need to use just the right amount of strength and maintain stability. Of course, that increased the level of difficulty significantly. I get it now, Bai Xiaochun thought excitedly. Lightness and heaviness is about more than the words light and heavy. It's not just being able to control heavy objects as if they didn't weigh a lot. That's just the surface meaning. The true, deeper meaning has to do, not with physical objects, but rather, with the way you manipulate spiritual energy. In the 5th level of qi condensation, your total reserve of spiritual energy is what makes the heaviness. When you take that spiritual energy and convert it into numerous tiny, unbreakable threads, that is the lightness. Doing it correctly is lightness and heaviness. Of course, with the surface meaning, the result is the speed with which you can effortlessly control physical objects. After getting to the root of the problem, he waved his hand again, and the boulder began to tremble. Then it suddenly rose up into the air. It was almost as if some enormous hand had simply grabbed it and pulled it up. Then, it began to whistle through the air toward Bai Xiaochun. However, before it could reach him, it suddenly fell down out of the air into his courtyard, where it kicked up a huge cloud of dust. Bai Xiaochun felt no discouragement. He continued to practice for another half a month. Unfortunately, for that entire time, he was unable to maintain one continuously stable thread of spiritual energy. Even when he was able to form a stable thread, the incredible heaviness of the rock ensured that the threads of spiritual energy always grew unstable and broke. Of course, when it came to controlling the little wooden sword, he had no problems whatsoever. Because of the vast difference in weight between the boulder and the sword, Bai Xiaochun now felt that controlling the wooden sword was much easier. Furthermore, after the month or more of training, he could move it with much greater speed. In actuality, he really had achieved lightness and heaviness. However, he wasn't satisfied. Eyes completely bloodshot, he gritted his teeth, and that vicious determination once again appeared. I refuse to believe I can't do it. He performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, causing the boulder to fly over and hover directly above him. Beads of sweat popped out on his forehead as he looked up nervously at the rock, exerting all the possible effort he could muster to preserve that invisible thread of spiritual energy. After all, if it broke, then the rock would fall. Although it wouldn't kill him, it would definitely be very painful. This time, he was clearly able to maintain the connection for a lot longer than before. However, after about an hour passed, rumbling sounds began to echo out, and then Bai Xiaochun let out a yelp as the stone smashed down. After a long moment, it trembled and fell off to the side as Bai Xiaochun crawled out from underneath it. Thanks to his undying skin, he wasn't hurt. However, the pain of what had just occurred left him grimacing. Despite that, his resolve grew even more intense. Another month went by, and the rock smashed down onto him over and over again. Eventually, he reached the point where he could actually keep it afloat for an entire day without dropping it. Furthermore, the height to which he could lift it grew greater and greater. Soon, he could hold it 30 meters high in the air. Of course, the pain that resulted when he dropped it from that height left Bai Xiaochun completely pale-faced. However, that was the only way to refine himself to the pinnacle. Gradually, his ability to achieve lightness and heaviness with his internal spiritual energy was growing more and more stable. Eventually, he reached the point where he almost never broke the connection. However, he still wasn't satisfied. Next, he didn't practice while sitting cross-legged, but instead, while exercising. That made things even more difficult, and led to continuous booms ringing out in his courtyard. Time passed, one day at a time. Soon the competition Li Qinghao had mentioned was now only 3 days away. The scene in Bai Xiaochun's courtyard was that of a figure zipping around while a 1,500-kilogram boulder floated around up above. Despite how much Bai Xiaochun was moving around, the boulder remained motionless up in the air. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun stopped running around, and stood there in front of his log cabin, laughing heartily. Then, he waved his right hand, causing the boulder to fly out of the courtyard and settle back firmly into the ground. Next, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing his little wooden sword to slash out in front of him. It moved so quickly it was little more than a blur, clearly it was much more powerful than before. Bai Xiaochun's face lit up with delight, and his hand began to flash with incantation gestures. The speed combined with the might of the sword, resulting in a shocking combination. All of a sudden, the courtyard almost seemed to be filled with innumerable little wooden swords, all flying about. In the end, he flicked his sleeve, causing the sword projections to vanish. Only one wooden sword remained, which then shot back toward Bai Xiaochun and vanished into his bag of holding. Now I finally feel ready to get into the top 5. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath. Although he didn't feel 100% confident, time was running out. All he could do was settle his chi and calm his mind, then sit down cross-legged to meditate and put himself in the proper state. 1. I already did the math, and for a boulder that tall to weigh only 1,500 to 1,600 kilograms, it would have to be really skinny. I think we can assume that General either made a mistake in how much it weighed, or it's some sort of magical rock that doesn't weigh as much as real-world boulders. 3 days later. Dawn. Bai Xiaochun's eyes opened at sunrise. He took a deep breath, and a serious expression could be seen on his face. This was his first time taking part in a competition like this. His fight early on with Xu Baosai actually didn't really count as much of a battle. However, now that he was going to participate in Fragrant Cloud Peak's outer sect competition, he would be truly fighting against his fellow sect members. He slowly rose to his feet, organized his bag of holding, and then somberly walked out of his residence. Moments later though, he came running back and started rummaging around under his bed until he found the leather coats he still had from back in his days at the ovens. After donning several layers, he then placed his jade pendant somewhere he could access it easily. Were it not for the fact that it would have led to too many questions, he would have put his turtle walk on his back. Why didn't I think of this earlier, he thought regretfully. I can't believe I forgot about that big black walk of mine. However, he was running out of time, and had no choice but to grit his teeth, turn, and leave. Taking a glance in the direction of the distant sun, his eyes filled with determination. Puffing his chest out, he began to climb toward the top of the mountain. At the moment, he was wearing far too many layers of leather clothing. Even though he didn't have the big black walk on, he still looked somewhat like a sticky rice dumpling. He was bundled up so tightly that after walking for only a little bit, he was already starting to sweat. However, even if he sweat more profusely, he wouldn't shed even one item of clothing. The competition was too important, and he couldn't stop thinking about how brutal it would be. As he walked along the path, he suddenly realized that it was quite a foggy morning on the mountain, and he actually had no idea where exactly he was. Did I take a wrong turn? He thought, and instantly looked around for someone to ask directions from. At the same time, his heart began to thump from the fear of possibly being late. At the top of Fragrant Cloud Peak was a fighting arena, which was where the competition was to take place. Quite a few people were already gathered there to watch the proceedings, and were chatting in hushed tones. There were even some disciples in the audience who were in the 5th level of chi condensation, although most of them stood there with arms folded across their chests as they looked at their junior brothers and sisters who would be participating in the competition. Of course, there were also people there to cheer on their friends. This outer sect competition wasn't very formal, but it was a place where the participants could stand out from the crowd. There were about 20 people who had come to join the competition, all of whom were sitting in the area cross-legged in meditation, preparing in earnest for the fighting to begin. No one in the competition was in the 3rd level of chi condensation. Although the rules allowed for that, most of the people who actually joined the competition were in the 5th level of chi condensation, although there were 5 or 6 who were in the 4th level. There was one young woman among the group who stood out from everyone else. She was tall and beautiful, and her outer sect disciple uniform could not conceal her curvaceous form. Anyone who laid eyes on her wouldn't be able to stop from slipping into a bit of a reverie. Her skin was white like snow, and she had eyebrows that curved as gracefully as willow leaves. She really was spectacularly beautiful. As for the Taoist trousers she wore, although they were loose, they stretched tightly around her rear end in a way that made it virtually impossible for any man to look away. There were quite a few outer sect disciples clustered around her, obviously her admirers. Although she couldn't quite compare to Zhou Xinqi, she was still one of the most famous of the outer sect disciples, Du Lingfei. 1. Du Lingfei's name in Chinese is Du Lingfei. Du Lingfei. Du is a common surname. Ling means to rise up. Fei means luxurious. Elder sister Du's cultivation base is in the great circle of the 5th level of chi condensation, so she'll definitely take first place in this competition. There's not even any suspense in the matter. You can't underestimate elder brother Chen Ziying, though. I heard that he had a cultivation base breakthrough last month. He might not be in the great circle of the 5th level of chi condensation, but he's close. Standing not too far away from Du Lingfei was an arrogant-looking young man, the same Chen Ziying who had been shocked by Bai Xiaochun's bamboo outside the mission's office that day. Even as everyone was discussing the matter, Chen Ziying looked over at Du Lingfei with a strange gleam in his eyes. Although he wasn't too confident in being able to take first place, he was pretty certain he could take second. Besides, he might also be able to take advantage of the situation to get to know Du Lingfei a bit better. It was at about this point that 2 beams of light whistled through the air from off in the distance. It was none other than Li Qinghao, followed by an emaciated old man. The old man had swarthy skin, but his eyes shone brightly, and he seemed like a very strict person. The surrounding outer sect disciples were completely shocked to find that Li Qinghao would be in attendance at the competition, and quickly clasped hands in greeting. Greeting, Peak Lord. Greetings, Elder Son. Everyone was flabbergasted that the Peak Lord would personally come to an event like this. Small competitions like this were almost always presided over by Elder Son. Du Lingfei and Chen Ziying were also shocked, and had very serious expressions on their faces as they bowed in greeting to Li Qinghao. Li Qinghao looked around benevolently, nodding. As he scanned the crowd of disciples, however, he frowned when he realized that Bai Xiaochun wasn't there. When the surrounding outer sect disciples saw Li Qinghao frowning, their hearts began to thump. Du Lingfei instantly began to get nervous, unsure of why the Peak Lord might be displeased. Shall we begin, Peak Lord? asked Elder Sun, who stood next to Li Qinghao. Li Qinghao was just about to reply when, all of a sudden, a sweat-soaked spheroid shape could be seen speeding toward them from off in the distance. "I got lost," cried Bai Xiaochun as he ran along. It was too foggy. Not only was Bai Xiaochun very nervous, he also felt that the whole situation was very unfair. After all, he wasn't very familiar with all the mountain paths, and considering how foggy it had been, he had simply gotten lost while thinking. As soon as the words left his mouth, all of the outer sect disciple involuntarily looked over. There were quite a few of them who were familiar with Bai Xiaochun, and when they heard the words he called out, they began to snicker. As for those who didn't know him, they frowned, and gleams of derision could be seen in their eyes. As far as they were concerned, the only reason he could have for getting lost on the way to the competition was that he rarely ventured up to the top of the mountain, and didn't care much about the competitions that the sect held. Most likely, he was only used to strolling around for pleasure. Du Lingfei looked at him, and remembered him as one of the people who had been chasing after Zhou Xinqi recently. Supposedly, he had worked hard to catch the great chicken bandit. Du Lingfei immediately turned away in disdain, not willing to even look at him. Chen Ziying looked at Bai Xiaochun in complete shock, and couldn't help but glance over at Li Qinghao. He hadn't forgotten what Bai Xiaochun had said at the missions office about Li Qinghao being his uncle. That would explain why Li Qinghao had been frowning right now, and after analyzing the matter, he realized that when fighting Bai Xiaochun, he would have to be careful not to beat him too badly. Li Qinghao snorted coldly, glaring at Bai Xiaochun for a moment before nodding at Elder Sun. Elder Sun looked thoughtfully at Bai Xiaochun for a moment, then laughed and waved his sleeve. "Very well. All disciples who wish to participate in the outer sect fighting competition, please step into the arena." Seeing Li Qinghao's glare caused Bai Xiaochun to feel more than ever that the situation was completely unfair. However, he didn't dare to give voice to his sentiments. As soon as the words left Elder Sun's mouth, Bai Xiaochun was the first disciple to leap up onto the platform, chest puffed out proudly, looking as though mountains of daggers and seas of flames couldn't impinge on his honor. Soon, all the contestants were in the arena. Including Bai Xiaochun, there were 20 in total. The rules for competitions like this one were fairly lax. Elder Sun looked at the contestants for a moment, then pulled out a small cloth sack, within which were a collection of marbles with numbers on them. One by one, the competitors filed over to take a marble, which would indicate the order in which they fought. Bai Xiaochun didn't manage to get first in line. He got stuck in the middle, and when he pulled out his marble, it had the number 11 written on it. "Very well," Elder Sun said coolly. "Now, everyone step back so that the first match can begin. Fighters number 1 and 2, prepare to begin." Bai Xiaochun and the others quickly left the fighting arena, whereas the disciples with the number 1 and 2 marbles remained. As the two stared each other down, brilliant light began to shine in their eyes. Soon they began to fight, and the booming sounds of battle rang out. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun's mind was racing. He kept telling himself that, considering there were 20 people in this competition, all he had to do was win twice to make it into the top 5. He was also wondering who it was that got the number 12 marble, but no one was willing to reveal to everyone else which numbers they had, making it virtually impossible for him to determine who he would be fighting. Even as his spirits began to fall, the first match ended, and the second began. Du Lingfei was one of the fighters in this match, and she immediately performed an incantation gesture, causing a banner to fly out, which then turned into a stream of mist that enveloped her opponent. After struggling a bit, the disciple couldn't escape, and conceded, filled with admiration for Du Lingfei. The third and fourth matches went by quickly enough, and when it came time for the fifth match, Chen Ziying secured a quick and efficient victory over a disciple in the 4th level of Qi condensation. "Fighters number 11 and 12, step forward and let the match begin," Elder Sun called out. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and walked forward, a very serious expression on his face. After setting foot into the arena, he found that his opponent was a tall, gaunt young man with a cold smile on his face. His cultivation base was extraordinary, in the 5th level of Qi condensation. His eyes flashed like lightning, and overall, he seemed like the type of person who was not to be trifled with. "Well, junior brother," the gaunt young man said, his voice cold, "you have the bad luck to have run into me in the first round. It's not too late to concede. If you don't, you'll have to take responsibility for yourself if you get injured." However, in the instant that the words left the young man's mouth, Bai Xiaochun suddenly let out a powerful roar. The roar was so intense that everything shook, and quite a few audience members were shocked. The gaunt young man was also taken aback, and even backed up a bit without even thinking about it, staring at Bai Xiaochun with wide eyes. After roaring, Bai Xiaochun slapped his jade pendant, causing a green glow to surround him. That didn't leave him feeling safe, though, so he pulled out a big stack of paper talismans, which he rapidly stuck all over himself. Each time he did, they would emit a powerful glow, until he was covered with no less than 10 individual shields. Their combined power transformed into a protective wall nearly 1.5 meters thick. From a distance, the sight was completely shocking. Because of all the protective shields, Bai Xiaochun's subsequent shout was actually a bit muffled. "Alright, bring it on." The gaunt young man was still staring blankly at Bai Xiaochun, and it wasn't just him. The other outer sect disciples, including the other contestants, were all gaping in shock. In all the times they had observed competitions like this, they had never seen anyone use protective shields to such an extent. Li Qinghao's face twitched, but from the look in his eyes, it was clear he could do nothing about the situation. Chen Ziying took a deep breath as he grew even more certain that Bai Xiaochun and Li Qinghao were actually relatives. However, Du Lingfei simply gave a cold harumph, and her derision increased. Everyone watched with wide eyes as the gaunt young man down in the arena let out his own roar, then performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing a wooden sword to fly directly toward Bai Xiaochun. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.